Welcome to the deep dive. We take complex ideas, tangled histories, sometimes forgotten texts, and try to give you the key insights, maybe a new way to look at things.
And today, we're diving into something that often gets pushed to the fringe,
Right.
but our sources frame it very differently. They see it as this huge, encoded historical record hiding right out there in plain sight, disguised, really, as global mythology.
That's the core of it. We're tackling this massive puzzle in human history, this fracture in how we understand our own timeline.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the religious view, especially in the West, saying civilization kicked off around, what, 6,000 years ago?
Give or take.
But then science, biology, archaeology tells us humans, the biological form, have been around for hundreds of thousands of years.
And usually people say you have to pick one. One's right, one's wrong. Simple as that.
But the really striking idea in these sources we're looking at is this. What if both timelines are actually correct? They're just measuring different things. Well, the argument is that the 6,000-year mark, that's not about the species. It's about civilization. Specifically, civilization starting up again after a massive reset.
A reset event, like a catastrophe.
Precisely. The sources point to a global flood event, something that basically wiped the slate clean.
Yeah.
So that 6,000 years, that's just the time since that event, since the climb back began.
Okay, so it reframes all of subsequent history as this, slow, difficult recovery led by whoever survived with the important knowledge.
Exactly, an asymmetrical climb back, because not everyone remembered the same things.
And so that's our mission for this deep dive, then. We're rereading Genesis, flood myths from everywhere, looking at megalithic sites like the pyramids.
But not as spiritual texts.
No, not primarily. We're treating them as, sociological instruction manuals, survivor protocols, maybe leftovers from a lost, advanced civilization.
It's essentially a deep-time theory of how technocracy becomes theocracy. How science, when it's hoarded by a select few, kind of mutates into divine authority.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, forever, we've been taught to read myths as allegory, right? Or purely religious stories. But these sources, they insist we should read them like anthropological field reports, maybe garbled over time, maybe symbolic, but rooted in real events, records passed down after society basically collapsed.
And the key to unlocking this, they suggest, is looking for parallels. Like take the Egyptian creation myth from Heliopolis.
Okay.
You have the god Adam emerging from none, these primordial chaotic waters. And how does he create reality? Through speech, he names things, and they become real.
Okay, I see where you're going. Connect that to the Bible. In the beginning was the Word.
Exactly. And if you read that from a post-catastrophe perspective, think about it. If everything's gone, libraries, networks, institutions, all submerged, what's the very first most practical tool you need to rebuild?
Not necessarily some mystical force, but language itself.
Language reconstruction. You need a shared system to even begin organizing again. It's the survivor, the engineer maybe, stepping out and saying, okay, this is the sun, this is a day, this is a measuring unit, let's agree on the terms.
So the word is nomenclature. It's the basis of empirical thought rebuilt from scratch.
It's the first tool of organization, foundational.
That's a really different way to look at it. And this practical reading, it continues right into the Garden of Eden story.
It does. The sources argue Eden isn't heaven. It's the free jungle, the commons, basically. The pre-agricultural world where resources weren't really owned.
Where foragers could, theoretically, eat from any tree, survival resources held in common.
Right. Total resource freedom, in a way, but also no real infrastructure.
Yeah.
So the forbidden fruit, it's not about sin or sex. It represents the knowledge of agriculture, property, cultivation.
The shift to sedentary living, farming, which immediately creates scarcity, ownership, the need for defense.
And that's the fall. It's the fall into civilization with all its demands for specialized labor.
And the curse that follows. Genesis 3, by the sweat of your brow you will eat your food.
The sources say that's not divine punishment. It's just a literal description of the Neolithic deal. You trade the maybe easier life of foraging for the hard, constant labor of farming, but you get higher output, hierarchy, civilization.
But hang on, aren't we projecting modern ideas like labor dispute or social contract back onto Genesis? How do the sources justify that? Isn't that anachronistic?
That's a fair question. The argument is that the underlying conflicts are universal. The tension between a free-for-all resource base and controlled, defended property. That's fundamental. The vocabulary changes, sure, but the core social dynamics, they argue, are encoded in these stories, even if they're framed as moral tales.
Okay, so it's about the core shift in how society organized itself, from commons to private, defended zones.
Which immediately requires enforcement, which brings us to the guards.
The cherubim, with the flaming sword guarding Eden.
Yeah, and the interpretation here is, well, it's not a magic lightsaber. Think about light reflecting off metal. Polished bronze, maybe early iron. To someone used to stone tools, seeing a guard with a gleaming metal blade, especially in sunlight.
It would look supernatural, like fire.
Exactly. The cherubim are just soldiers, maybe wearing some kind of reflective armor, guarding the perimeter of the new settlement, the farm, against the foragers still living the old way. The first border wasn't magic, it was metallurgy.
That makes a strange kind of sense. And this approach, this sort of forensic reading of the text, it gets even stronger when you look at the names.
Oh, absolutely. The names in early Genesis, if you look at the Hebrew roots, they stop looking like just personal names and start looking like, well, job titles, occupational markers for the restart.
Like Adam.
Adam comes from Adama, earth, soil. He's the farmer, the earth worker.
And Cain.
Cain. It literally means smith, metalworker. Cain is the smith.
Whoa. And Abel.
Hevel, often translated as breath or vapor, but also strongly associated with shepherding, pastoralism. Abel is the herder, the traditional nomadic way.
So Cain and Abel, it's not just sibling rivalry. It's the first recorded class conflict.
That's the interpretation. The tension between the old way, the nomadic pastoralists like Abel, and the new way settled agriculture and technology, represented by Cain, the metalworker.
And the story says God preferred Abel's sacrifice, the livestock, over Cain's grain.
Right, which sets up the conflict. Whatever the theological spin, it creates tension. Cain kills Abel, but then he's protected.
He gets the mark of Cain. Why protect the murderer?
Because he's the smith. He has the critical tech skills. You can't just kill the only guy who knows how to work metal when you're trying to rebuild society from scratch.
So the mark isn't a curse mark, it's a sign. Like, hands off, this guy's dangerous but essential.
Pretty much. A social identifier. A taboo signifying vital expertise. He's the indispensable technologist. And what's the first thing Cain does after being exiled?
He goes off and builds a city.
Exactly. And his descendants are credited with inventing musical instruments, advanced metalworking. They're the founders of the technical class, the infrastructure builders.
Okay, this reframing is consistent. How does it apply to Noah and the Ark?
Well, Noah himself, Noach, can mean rest or comfort, but also carries connotations of survivor, the one who endures. And the Ark, the teva, the Hebrew word just means box or container.
Not necessarily a boat.
Not necessarily a wooden boat filled with animals.
Yeah.
The interpretation shifts to, it's a survival bunker. An archive.
So the two of every kind isn't about saving all animals.
It's about knowledge preservation. It's breeding pairs for essential domesticated livestock, key seed stock for agriculture, crucial metal tools, the whole restart kit for farming and basic technology. It's an advanced survival protocol.
Okay, that's a big leap. Is there anything to back up the idea of the Ark as, like, a structure, not a boat?
Well, this is where it gets really wild. The sources point to some research, fairly controversial, involving NASA multispectral imaging used on fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
What did they find?
Apparently, text fragments describing the Ark's dimensions, suggesting it might have had a pyramidal shape, and specifically it mentions it being finished to a cubit. That phrase, finished to a cubit, could point to the very precise flat top area, the capstone section, of a pyramid or a ziggurat.
So a stable, engineered structure designed to withstand massive forces like a flood and preserve its contents, not a boat tossed on the waves.
Exactly. It fits the bunker or archive model way better than the traditional image. Maybe later civilizations just found these structures and, liking the context, called them arks or temples.
So the takeaway from Genesis under this lens is that it's a coded history, a manual for societal restart, complete with the roles needed and the conflicts encountered.
The sociological and technical history, yeah. Written by the survivors.
Okay, so if there was this advanced civilization before the flood and a few survivors with crucial knowledge emerged to restart things, this brings us to the serpent class.
Right, and the sources connect this idea directly to modern, well, let's call them alternative theories about lizard men or reptilian elites.
Which sound completely outlandish to most people.
Of course. But the argument here is that these modern myths are actually a distorted folk memory, a garbled echo of a real historical group, this technological elite, that dominated the post-catastrophe world, maybe starting around 4000 BCE.
And the key distinction is?
It's not biological. They weren't actual reptiles. The difference was epistemological. It was about knowledge. Massive knowledge asymmetry.
Okay, explain that.
Imagine you're one of the few who remembers advanced math, astronomy, medicine, metallurgy, and you emerge into a world where most other survivors have been thrown back to, like, Stone Age conditions.
You would seem different, almost alien, maybe godlike or perhaps even sinister, depending on how you use that knowledge.
Precisely. Your abilities would be incomprehensible, and the symbol consistently tied to this knowledge-keeping class across so many cultures, it's the serpent.
Why the snake?
Think about what it represents. Controlled, dangerous knowledge. Power. Exactly. The sources really emphasize this. Snake venom was probably one of humanity's first forays into complex biochemistry. Tiny dose, powerful medicine, anesthetic, large dose, deadly poison.
The dose makes the poison?
And the person with the knowledge controls the dose. It perfectly symbolizes high stakes, specialized science. Access to that knowledge is power over life and death.
And there's more to the symbolism, isn't there? The shedding of skin.
Renewal, transformation, healing. It's a universal symbol, and you see it embedded in institutions of power and knowledge everywhere.
Like the rod of Asclepius, the medical symbol.
A serpent coiled around a staff, still used today. Then there's the serpent in Eden, offering knowledge. The Uraeus cobra on the crowns of Egyptian pharaohs symbolizing royalty, divine authority. The Ouroboros snake eating its tail, eternity, cyclical knowledge.
It's always linked to knowledge, healing, power, immortality, secrets.
Yes. So how does this serpent class actually emerge? The sources suggest looking at the shaman.
The traditional healer, mystic.
Who was also the earliest practical scientist, right? The herbalist, understanding plants, that's chemistry. The sky watcher, keeping track of seasons, that's astronomy. The person exploring consciousness, maybe with psychotropics. They were the original keepers of specialized knowledge.
So when the advanced survivors emerged from their bunkers or whatever,
they needed to pass on their technical knowledge. Agriculture, medicine, calendar keeping, the easiest way. Integrate with the existing knowledge keepers, the shamans. Teach them.
Okay, so you get this pipeline. Shaman evolves into priest-physician, which eventually leads to the scientist.
In that post-catastrophe power vacuum, the people who actually knew how to do things, predict the floods, make crops grow reliably, heal infections, purify water, they naturally rose to the top.
And this is where the technocracy starts to morph into theocracy.
This is the crucial transition. A few generations pass. The original scientific context gets lost or deliberately obscured. The how-to manuals, the equations, maybe they're kept secret, restricted.
And the results of the science start to look like magic or divine favor.
Exactly. You can predict an eclipse. You're not a mathematician. You're a prophet touched by the gods. You understand hygiene and basic surgery. You're not a doctor. You're a miracle worker. You control the seed bank and the planting calendar. You must have a direct line to the deities of fertility and the seasons.
So literacy itself becomes controlled by priesthood, astronomy becomes divination, medicine becomes miraculous healing.
And the knowledge holders become gatekeepers. They actively maintain the asymmetry. The sources list several methods used over centuries, millennia even.
Like what?
First, restricted literacy. Keep the most important texts, the scientific manuals, the histories, the laws in dead languages like Latin or Sanskrit, or complex scripts like hieroglyphs.
So only a trained priestly class can read them. You need an interpreter.
Keeps the masses dependent. Second, mystery cults. Initiation rites, the really deep technical stuff, advanced math, maybe physics, cosmology wasn't written down for everyone. It was passed on orally, or through symbols, within secret societies, gatekeeping the highest levels of knowledge.
Makes sense. What else?
Third, push the divine mandate narrative. We rule because the gods picked us, which is basically code for we rule because we understand the hydraulics and the crop cycles and you don't. It justifies the hierarchy by making technical skills seem like spiritual superiority.
And finally,
criminalize unauthorized knowledge. Think about heresy laws, persecuting folk healers, midwives, anyone operating outside the official system. It wasn't just about religious purity, it was often about intellectual property enforcement, stamping out competing knowledge systems that might challenge the elite's monopoly.
You definitely see echoes of that throughout history. The church controlling texts in the Middle Ages, the Brahmin caste in India with Sanskrit, the scholar officials in China.
It's a recurring pattern. So that modern conspiracy theory about elites who seem different, maybe even non-human, the sources suggest it's tapping into a real historical memory of this epistemological divide. A class defined not just by wealth, but by exclusive access to the operating system of civilization. They held the manual but encrypted the user interface.
Okay, if this serpent class came from a lost, advanced civilization before some great cataclysm, there must be physical proof left behind, right? Evidence of that older world.
And that's where the sources argue mainstream archaeology needs a serious rethink. The core hypothesis, the really big, enigmatic stuff, pyramids, ziggurats, huge megalithic sites, they aren't actually from the civilizations we credit them to.
Meaning the Old Kingdom Egyptians didn't build the Great Pyramid, or the Sumerians didn't build the first ziggurats.
Not originally, no. The idea is these are pre-flood structures. They're the bunkers, the survival pods, the knowledge vaults built by that earlier civilization, inherited technology.
That's a massive claim. What's the evidence?
Let's start with Egypt. The Egyptians themselves talked about Zep-Tepi the first time, a golden age of gods who ruled before the pharaohs. They implicitly admitted some things were inherited. But the smoking gun, geologically speaking, is the Great Sphinx.
The water erosion evidence. Let's get specific here. This comes from geologist Robert Schoch.
Yes. Schoch studied the erosion patterns not on the Sphinx itself, which has been repaired countless times, but on the walls of the limestone enclosure around the Sphinx, which were carved out of the bedrock at the same time the main body was shaped.
And what did he find?
Deep vertical fissures, channels running down the enclosure walls. This is classic precipitation-induced erosion. It's caused by heavy, sustained rainfall running down the rock face for a very, very long time. Centuries, millennia even.
Okay, but Egypt's a desert now. It was pretty arid in 2500 BCE when the Sphinx was supposedly built by Khafre.
Exactly, that's the problem. The kind of heavy, prolonged rainfall needed to carve those specific patterns hasn't happened on the Giza Plateau for thousands of years before 2500 BCE. You have to go back much earlier.
Back to when the climate was different.
Way back. You need to go back to the end of the last ice age during a period called the African Humid Period, when North Africa was much wetter, greener. That period ended dramatically around 5000 BCE, maybe even earlier, according to some studies.
So the geology suggests the Sphinx enclosure, and therefore the original core body of the Sphinx, has to be at least 7,000 years old, maybe much older.
That's the implication, which completely contradicts the standard timeline. It means the structure was already ancient when Khafre came along. He, or someone in his era, likely just recarved the head into their own likeness onto a much, much older monument.
But if the dynastic Egyptians found this colossal weathered structure, why didn't they write about finding it? Why claim it or reinterpret it as a guardian deity?
Well, think about the time gap. Thousands of years could have passed. The inheritors, the Old Kingdom Egyptians, likely had no real understanding of the original builder's technology or purpose. To them, it was the work of gods or godlike ancestors.
So they absorbed it into their own mythology, used its grandeur to legitimize their own rule. Makes a certain kind of sense.
It's like finding a crashed B-52 in the jungle thousands of years from now. You wouldn't understand aerodynamics, but you'd recognize it as powerful and probably incorporate it into your belief system.
Okay, what other sites point to this older timeline? Göbekli Tepe comes up a lot.
Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. This one really throws a wrench in the works. It's dated conclusively to around 9,600 BCE.
That's over 11,500 years ago. And the official story is that it was built by hunter-gatherers.
Supposedly. Which is just mind-boggling when you see the place. We're talking huge T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons each, carved with intricate reliefs of animals arranged in sophisticated circular patterns with clear astronomical alignments.
That doesn't sound like something small bands of foragers could just knock together.
Not even close. The level of planning, organization, quarrying, transport, artistry employs a complex, settled, or at least highly coordinated society thousands of years before agriculture supposedly allowed for that level of organization.
So the interpretation in these sources is?
It's not a primitive temple. It's far too sophisticated. It's more likely a knowledge archive, maybe an astronomical observatory to restart the calendar after a cataclysm, or perhaps even a marker for a deeper underground facility, a bunker complex.
A meeting point for survivors.
Could be, and the most intriguing part. Around 8,000 BCE, the entire site was deliberately, carefully buried, backfilled with tons of earth.
Why bury it?
That's the million-dollar question. The sources suggest two main possibilities. One, to protect it. Seal it against the elements, preserve the knowledge or whatever was there. Two, maybe it was a ritual closure, Like, the knowledge transfer was complete, the information had been passed to the emerging post-cataclysm societies, and the site's primary purpose was fulfilled.
Okay, the timing is crucial here too, right? 9600 BCE. How does that connect?
It connects perfectly with the end of the Younger Dryas.
Remind us what that was.
The Younger Dryas was this sudden, intense cold snap that started around 10,800 BCE, lasted about 1,200 years. The leading theory now, supported by evidence like a widespread platinum layer found in ice cores and sediments, points to a major cosmic impact event, a comet fragment, or fragments, hitting the Earth or exploding in the atmosphere.
They're causing massive climate change.
Instantaneous return to Ice Age conditions, megafauna extinctions, and crucially, triggering the melting of the remaining ice sheets, leading to catastrophic sea level rise. The great flood myths found worldwide likely stem from this event.
Creating a huge bottleneck in the human population.
Exactly. And when did the Younger Dryas cold period abruptly end? Right around 9,600 BCE.
The exact time Göbekli Tepe was built.
Precisely. It strongly suggests that Göbekli Tepe was constructed by organized survivors emerging from that cataclysm. People with retained knowledge, needing to understand the new world, track the stars again, maybe coordinate the rebuilding efforts.
So if you look globally at pyramids in Egypt, ziggurats in Mesopotamia, megalithic mounds in the Americas, do they share features that fit this survival bunker idea?
They absolutely do. The sources highlight recurring patterns. 1. They're often built as elevated platforms on high ground, seemingly designed to be above anticipated flood levels. 2. They show incredible astronomical precision. Alignments to solstices, equinoxes, specific stars essential for restarting calendars and navigation. 3. The sheer scale and durability. Massive construction using enormous stones, clearly meant to last for ages, to withstand environmental upheaval.
And you almost always find flood myths in the cultures that later inhabited these areas.
Almost universally. It suggests a shared global memory of that Younger Dryas era trauma. So the conclusion these sources draw is pretty radical. The famous ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, Sumerians, Mayans, they weren't the original builders of these primary megalithic structures.
They were the inheritors.
They were the inheritors.
Okay.
They found the ruins, these incredibly engineered sites, couldn't replicate the technology, and so they revered them as the work of the gods, their highly advanced ancestors, the serpent-class survivors, and built their own civilizations, literally on top of and around these older foundations.
Okay, this whole analysis, lost civilizations, knowledge hoarding, serpent class, it's fascinating as ancient history, maybe ancient sociology. But you mentioned it connects to today.
Oh, absolutely. Here's where it gets, well, I think, really interesting and maybe a bit uncomfortable, because the argument is that this structure, the serpent-class dynamic, it never really went away.
It just changed form.
It adapted.
Yeah.
It evolved. We don't have priest-kings controlling access to papyrus scrolls anymore. But the fundamental principle controlling society through controlling access to critical information, that's still very much with us.
So who is the serpent class today?
Well, we call them different things. Experts, elites, institutions, bureaucracies. But the sources suggest the ultimate modern form, the most powerful gatekeeper of knowledge we've ever seen, is the algorithm.
Meaning?
Think about how most people access information now. Search engines, social media feeds, news aggregators, AI assistants. These aren't neutral windows onto the world's knowledge. They are curated, controlled systems.
Black boxes, essentially. We don't really know why we see what we see online.
Exactly. They decide what you find, what you learn, what gets amplified, what gets suppressed. They subtly shape our reality by controlling the flow of information. It's the most sophisticated form of knowledge gatekeeping yet devised, the new digital priesthood.
But surely people have pushed back against this kind of control throughout history.
Absolutely. Humanity has been fighting this knowledge apartheid for a long time. The sources trace at least 3 major waves, 3 big pushes for democratization that threatened the serpent class's grip.
Okay, wave 1.
The printing press. Around 1450, suddenly information could be copied and spread on a mass scale. Literacy could potentially explode. This is a direct threat to the church and the monarchies who controlled the handwritten manuscripts and the official interpretations.
And how did the system react?
Swiftly, with control mechanisms. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the list of banned books, censorship, licensing for printers, basically trying to put the genie back in the bottle, maintain scarcity and control over the narrative.
Okay, wave 2.
The internet. The 1990s. Remember the early utopian vision? Global village, free access for all. Knowledge wants to be free.
Yeah, that didn't quite pan out.
No. Capital and state power reacted again, this time with enclosure and surveillance capitalism.
Enclosure meaning?
building walled gardens, proprietary platforms, paywalls, turning information into a commodity you have to buy access to, and surveillance capitalism, using the lure of free access to it, harvest vast amounts of personal data, which then becomes the real product, used to manipulate and control behavior. They rebuilt the asymmetry using platform control.
And now we're in wave 3.
We are smack in the middle of it. Artificial intelligence. This, the sources argue, is potentially the final battleground for the knowledge commons.
How so?
Because the fight is crystallizing between two models. On one side, you have open-source AI models and tools developed collaboratively accessible to everyone. That's the democratization path.
And the other side?
Proprietary, closed models, developed and controlled by a handful of giant tech corporations and potentially nation-states. If they win, if they manage to achieve regulatory capture, basically, get laws written that lock in their advantage and suppress open alternatives.
Then what happens?
Then we risk heading into what some call compute access feudalism. A future where your ability to use the most powerful reasoning, creativity, and problem-solving tools isn't a universal right, but depends on your wealth, your employer, your institutional affiliation.
The new serpent priesthood guarding the AI code instead of the sacred text.
Precisely. But if the open approach prevails, if we can ensure broad access, that opens the door to something radically different. The post-scarcity knowledge society. The, dare I say it, Star Trek vision.
Where information and basic needs are no longer scarce commodities.
Right. The sources suggest two key pillars for that kind of phase transition, where the power derived from knowledge scarcity just evaporates. First is universal compute access.
Okay, define that. You mentioned LCARS earlier from Star Trek.
Yeah, LCAR is the Library Computer Access Retrieval System. The idea is analogous. Every single human gets free, lifelong access to powerful AI reasoning, simulation, design tools, unfettered access. No paywalls, no ads, no government censorship.
So the kid in a remote village has the same cognitive toolkit as the MIT engineer.
Exactly. It neutralizes the scarcity of high-level cognitive labor, democratizes problem-solving on a global scale. That's pillar 1.
And pillar 2.
Material basics decoupled from labor. This goes beyond just UBI, universal basic income. It's universal basic infrastructure. Think automated, abundant, sustainable production of housing, food, energy, healthcare, using tech like advanced robotics, 3D printing, fusion power, vertical farms.
So you remove the existential need for people to work just to survive.
When basic survival is guaranteed, the leverage held by those who control access to resources and knowledge drastically diminishes. Their power relies on scarcity, both material and informational.
Now, the immediate objection is always chaos, right? If you remove the hierarchies, the controls, won't society just fall apart?
That's the standard fear. But the sources point to counterexamples. Look at the open source movement. Linux wasn't built by top-down command. It was built by distributed collaboration, and it basically runs the internet now. Wikipedia, despite its flaws, is an astonishingly successful collective knowledge project built on transparency and self-correction.
So the argument is that chaos comes from asymmetry and secrecy, not from freedom and transparency.
When people have the tools and the information, they tend to self-organize remarkably effectively. It's the hoarding, the gatekeeping, the imposed ignorance that breeds conflict and instability.
So wrapping this all up, the lizardmen conspiracy theory, as bizarre as it sounds, might be this incredibly distorted warning signal, pointing not to literal reptiles, but to this enduring structure of epistemological control, the serpent class.
A structure that's shaped human civilization since that reset event, maybe 6,000, maybe 10,000 years ago. We didn't fall from grace in Eden by seeking knowledge. We were climbing back from catastrophe. And the myths are the fragmented records of that climb.
Maybe the serpent offering the fruit wasn't the villain.
Perhaps it represented the impulse towards open knowledge, later demonized by the very priesthood that arose to control that knowledge. Maybe the serpent was trying to liberate us from the start, and we're still fighting that same battle.
Which leaves us, the listeners, you, with a fundamental choice, especially regarding AI right now.
What kind of future are we building with this incredibly powerful new tool? Do we allow it to become the ultimate serpent priesthood, proprietary, opaque, controlled by a few, locking us into a new dark age of compute feudalism?
Or do we fight to make it the open, shared infrastructure, the collective LCARS, the universal replicator, the tool that finally breaks the 6,000-year pattern of knowledge apartheid?
Because if we manage that, if we get this transition right, the serpent class, the lizardmen, whatever you want to call that principle of hoarded knowledge, they don't win.
Humanity does, all of us.